Welcome to Stuff You Missed in History Class, a production of iHeartRadio.
Happy Friday. I'm Tracy V. Wilson.
And I'm Holly Fry.
We talked about Scott Joplin this week in a very, very long time on the short list episode. We mentioned we're going to have the Crash at Crush as an upcoming Saturday classic. I can't remember if that's this upcoming Saturday or a subsequent one. But I always try to go re-listen to the old episodes to make sure that we did not say something super wrong or something that didn't age well or whatever, or something that I remember we needed to correct, anything like that. And I really would have thought that episode was something we put out during the pandemic. And we did put out a playlist that included it during the pandemic. But no, it's from something like 2017. And I just, in my head, it was something way more recently than that. But I said in that episode how much I was conflicted about doing an episode on Scott Joplin because of really wanting to talk about him, but also feeling pretty heartbroken about the end of his life. Because it was at such a young age from an illness that there was no effective treatment for, and also just had so much stigma. So much stigma that for a long time, even organizations that were dedicated to, continuing his memory and promoting his work and emphasizing his contributions to the development of ragtime just didn't discuss it.
Right.
And instead would even say that he had died of heartbreak because he couldn't find a publisher for Treemonisha. And that probably did affect his mental health, but that was not the cause of his death.
Right.
Something that I originally had a bunch of stuff about in the outline that I wound up taking out because it was not totally germane to what we were talking about. So we did mention that the house that he lived in St. Louis has been named a landmark. That house and its existence as a museum has a whole long and contentious story, because the people who did the work to save that house and to turn it into a museum were the local Black community. And then the thing happened, which I think happens a lot in these kinds of situations, which was that the people who then became in charge of turning it into a museum were mostly white, and they didn't have those local connections. And there wasn't as much involvement of the people who had done that work. And so the people who had tried to save the house were really anticipating that they were going to have a museum and a cultural center that was specific to them and their history and their needs. And then when it first opened, it was way more devoted to just sort of celebrating Scott Joplin, which is also good, but wasn't what people were expecting or needed. And so that led to just I read a whole article about it, just a long process of trying to sort of move this house and the museum closer to to a more community-led effort. And then in October of last year, somebody broke into it and vandalized a whole bunch of stuff. And it seems from the news reporting this was somebody who was in a mental health crisis. I could not find more updated information. But I think based on the Missouri Department of Natural Resources website that it's still actually closed. I think it normally would have opened for the season by now, but it seems not to have.
That's a pity.
Yeah. Yeah. The items that they have on display there are not items that Scott Joplin owned. The things that are about ragtime are more things that are from that era. Most of the structures that were places that he lived or places he would be closely associated with, they don't exist anymore. They've mostly been torn down or replaced with something else, except for this one.
I'm a little embarrassed to admit that because I was born in 1971, to me, everyone's always known about Scott Joplin. I didn't realize that there was a whole period of just silence regarding him.
I didn't really either. Like I said in the episode, my first exposure to Scott Joplin was The Sting and the score to The Sting. That, in fact, was one of the things that made me want to take piano lessons. And I
Aw.
wanted to learn to play the entertainer. And I
Everybody
did.
played the entertainer.
Yes, I had a piano recital of the entertainer one year of the part that I had learned to play, which is the beginning part, a simplified version because I don't remember how long I had been taking piano lessons, but the full thing with all of the notes was beyond me at that point. So there's a couple things. One is I would call a lot of the arrangement of ragtime in general. A lot of it is Scott Joplin's music. So a lot of just Scott Joplin's music specifically. A lot of it in that movie is more madcap than is really written right. It's a lot faster. There's a lot more instrumentation in a lot of cases. And then also, initially, there were a lot of people that did not realize that it was an arrangement that Marvin Hamlish had done. And there were people in the 70s who thought that Marvin Hamlish had written all the music himself. Because, like, Scott Joplin is credited, but not till the end of the movie, I think. Also, my mom, just a big fan of Robert Redford and Paul Newman. So that was for sure. Yeah, so for sure movie to be watching at our house. I probably watched it younger than a person actually should really do that.
On the Scoville scale of like handsome men in a movie that are fun to watch, that's like a 7,022. Like,
yeah,
they're both so charming and so engaging and have great chemistry together. That's a great movie.
When people talk about the first album they ever bought, the first albums I ever bought in terms of like full-length albums were the soundtrack to The Sting and the original cast recording of the movie Annie.
Oh, no. That was not where I was. The first full album I ever bought was Pat Benatar.
Okay.
I have no regrets. Still love her to this day. Amazing.
It may surprise no one that I continue to have hangups about whether people will judge the music that I'm listening to, because the knowledge that my first purchases of albums as a child were The Sting and the original cast recording of Annie, my classmates thought that was absurd. I think they were mean children. So if you were in third grade with me, I think you owe me an apology.
I mean, those were not the first records I had.
Sure.
But that was the first record that like I purchased with my own dollars.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I bought these with my allowance.
Yeah, I had been gifted a record player at Christmas one year. My parents had selected an assortment of things.
Uh-huh.
There was some Anne Murray in there. There was some Crystal Gale. Remember them very distinctly. And it was not mine, but I essentially stole it from my father's collection.
Uh-huh.
Was a Peanuts album. That was like some of the adorable music that you hear on Peanuts cartoons, but also like interludes of the dialogue. So it was like an entertainment. It wasn't a music album. It was like an entertainment, as though you were watching a Peanuts television special. But it was on just audio. Oh,
yeah.
See, that also is not cool, but I sure loved it the most.
I like a lot of things that aren't cool, and I'm fine with it now. I think Scott Joplin's very cool, though.
Do you know, did it ever come up in your research why in that 1936, I'm pulling this out of my memory, book, he was listed as white?
I think that was just a mistake.
Like an assumption on the writer's part?
Yeah, like I don't know what could have caused that assumption, and I did not go into it. Like I didn't go looking for information about it. It was more that like I kept seeing it referenced, and then I went and looked up the original book to be like, okay, what did he actually say here when he assumed that Scott Joplin was white? And it's possible that his work was so well known at the time that there was an assumption that like a black musician could not have gotten that same amount. Like there were absolutely we've talked about this. There were successful black musicians, but like the scale of some of his musical success, maybe there was just an assumption that like the times would not have allowed a black musician to reach that same amount of prominence. I don't really know though, but like Alan Locke is sometimes called like the father of Black history. I don't love like the mother of, the father of kind of things, but like so much of his writing was about tracing Black people's contributions to things that they had been historically written out of. That it's a surprising error to have there.
Yeah.
I cannot remember if one of Alan Locke's works is also where it was originally people started to think that Deborah Sampson might have been Black. Maybe. I don't remember. I need to go look that up now. This is why having extemporaneous conversations on the show can be tricky because we don't necessarily remember anything from previous conversations.
We talked about William of Ockham this week.
Mm-hmm.
So much drama.
Yes.
I certainly had no idea that there was telling the Pope he was a heretic and was not being recognized as Pope, flipping a table and then running to Pisa.
Yeah.
I'm out. That's a move.
Yeah.
I found a moment of frustration in researching this episode, which is that at, this time and many times throughout history, the Catholic Church and the papacy has its tendrils in so many things going on throughout Europe in particular.
Yes.
That it becomes very hard to pluck things out and be like, no, I'm trying to focus on this lane only. And it's like, wait, this car of information is swerving over and it's kind of germane, but I don't know. Like, I mean, got to stop and make sure everybody understands why we're in Avignon.
Yeah.
Discuss why Louis IV hates him.
I was thinking as we were recording that it feels like it's been a while since we've had an episode that really touched on how inextricable the church was from so much of everyday life in Europe for a big swath of time.
Right.
It's not something that we've never talked about, but it sort of seems like it's been a bit since we have
it's been a minute.
Been in like that particular chunk of history, really. And it just made me think of it. Like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's in a time where theoretically people support the separation of church and state in many, not all, but many countries. It is interesting to think about, okay, yeah, but what if we had an election, we elected a president, and then a religious figure had to go, yeah, he's cool, before we could actually have an inauguration?
Mm-hmm.
That would be a strange and very different world. I also do love that Ockham probably would not have loved Occam's razor.
Yeah.
Be like, that's not quite what I was getting at, you guys.
Right.
Also, like, there's no concept where I put forth, here's a thing. It's more like one of many approaches
right,
to
right.
doing things.
I liked the whole conversation about what do we mean exactly when we say poor clothes?
Yes. I mean, this is the thing, right? Like, here's the thing. Okay, Pope John the 22nd, huge problem in a variety of ways. And I understand where he would get to the point of like, no, guys, you gotta own it if you're gonna use it, because otherwise we get into a legal tangle over here. I mean, it feels, I'm parsing it in a way that feels a little like a boardroom discussion of like, how are we gonna handle this clothes thing? But I understand where he would get to that point and be like, hey, your local folks have to work this out because like how you dress in Avignon is going to be different than how somebody dresses in Nîmes or some other place. So, we got to kind of stabilize to the region. But then, of course, that would cause the problems of this isn't being applied, unilaterally in fairness. I see where it got to be a big problem, even though it seems like it's just to talk about clothes. It's also a discussion of like, treatment of different people within the same theoretical order, right? They needed a Franciscans union is what they needed. Which is kind of what they were trying to do, right? To go, no, we need to make a solid set of rules that we all agree upon. harder to do than
Yeah.
I think most of us today, whether you are religious or not, we associate the Catholic Church and the papacy with just opulence. I mean, we've been to the Vatican. It's spectacular. Um, and part of that, like, spectacular presentation is, like, symbolizing to the masses, like, no, God is in the mix here. That is why everything here is beautiful. And it's like a way to convey that. And so the idea that the same people who would be like, more gold inlay, please, would be like, I don't really care if your robes are dirty or not. Like, there's a whole interesting thing there for me
Sure.
to like ask them to discuss what poor means, because he probably didn't know.
Yeah.
Now I want to go back to the Vatican really bad. The Vatican museums are spectacular. There's no other way to describe them.
We only saw like a little bit, really.
Like a fraction, like less than 6% probably.
Yeah.
And I still was like, yoing. I think I've said on the show before, I didn't realize like how vast their art collection was, how much modern art was in the collection. We got to that Marc Chagall room and I was like, you guys go ahead. I'm going to hang out here for a minute. I got some stuff to look at. There's a lot of spectacular art in that building.
Yeah.
Those buildings, plural.
I think that was in my terrible jet lag portion of the trip. And so like it's everything about it just has this haze of like just very disoriented fatigue, which is why when we go to Barcelona this November, I think I'm going to remember the thing I already know about myself, which is that I need to show up at least a day early and have a little adjustment time. I kind of forgot that I needed to do that when we went to Italy because we hadn't traveled at all since before the pandemic started. And I had just I was so focused on getting there, getting home, nobody getting COVID. Like I was so focused on that like I just sort of forgot anything else useful about traveling.
Right. I mean, the trick there, right, is that for a lot of airlines, the way they run trips from North America to Europe is like you kind of get on an evening flight and then with the time change, you land there in the morning.
Yeah.
Now, for me, I'm like, cool, we're here and I'm just going to start my day. And it doesn't matter that I haven't slept and I'm a little bit crazy. I'm just going to gun it. I'm going to push through and then I will collapse tonight and get a great sleep. But that doesn't work for everybody.
No. And for me personally, it was complicated by the fact that we had a plane change in Dublin. And so it was like by the time I was sleepy enough to sleep a little bit on the plane, we were landing in Dublin.
You had to get up.
And then the Dublin to Rome flight was short enough that it was like, once you're settled in, you're landing again. So it was like, I know this is an absurd problem to talk about. We're talking about having the ability to do international travel and being exhausted by it. But the whole point is, I don't remember much of the Vatican Museum because there was just a big cloud of not knowing where I was or when sleep would happen.
Yeah, I feel like I was just screeching with glee on the inside a lot because I was like, there's so much art and it's right there and it's amazing. I think we mentioned before that I witnessed somebody just grazing his hand along all of the hundreds and hundreds of years old tapestries and I almost like lost my mind. Like I had to like not tackle him.
Right.
Because that's the thing. There's a lot of amazing art and it's not the same way like I think of when you go to a museum like the Met or the Louvre, there are a lot of docents around like, don't touch that, don't touch that, don't touch that. There are so many huge groups going through the Vatican museums, and a lot of that stuff is like just in a hallway that you're walking through. It's not behind glass. It's not behind even a rope in many cases. And so there are so many unfortunate temptations to just want to touch things. And I get the temptation, but I was horrified and freaked out seeing that happen.
Yeah.
I was losing my mind. So don't do that if you go. And if you get a chance to go, I highly recommend it. I would like to go back and just spend several days in a row going through the Vatican museums because it's mind-blowingly huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe next time I will look for things related to Pope John the 22nd, see what they're about. Be like, how much gold? You don't understand what poverty is, do you? But we'll see. We'll see. If this is your weekend coming up, we hope that you get to maybe go to a museum and not touch things, unless you're supposed to, unless it's a please touch me installation. Those happen. But if that's not your thing, we hope whatever it is that you do this weekend, even if it's just sitting on the couch, listen, sometimes that's the best way to spend their time. Whatever you do, that it's restful and enjoyable and that you get some restoration and delight out of it. If you don't have time off this weekend and you're working or have other obligations, I hope that whatever you are doing, you still find a little bit of fun in it. Still don't touch the art, though. We will be right back here tomorrow with a classic, and on Monday we will have another brand new episode.
Stuff You Missed in History Class is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.